Hello and welcome to another accounting tutorial where today we'll be looking at what it means for a business to be partially exempt in relation to VAT. I would hope we all know at this point that if a business makes taxable supplies, they must charge VAT on their products or services that they sell and can claim back VAT on the products or services that they purchase. If you're not sure on the basics of VAT, I would highly recommend going and reading up on these before watching this video, because it won't make a great deal of sense if you don't already have the basics. Now, you may also be aware that if a business makes only exempt supplies, it cannot register for VAT. Just to enforce the point, this is only applying to making exempt supplies and not zero-rated supplies. The current .gov list of exempt goods and services is shown on screen now. So this leads us to a question. What happens when a business makes both taxable and exempt supplies? Well, as a starting point, any expenditure which relates solely to taxable supplies or relates solely to exempt supplies would follow the normal process of either reclaiming the VAT or, if exempt, not reclaiming the VAT. The third category is where an expense relates to both taxable and exempt supplies, and a typical example of this would be a business's heat and light, which will often cover both taxable and exempt areas of the business. This is where the partial exemption comes in, because a business is allowed to reclaim a proportion of the VAT. To determine the proportion, we need to firstly look at the proportion of taxable supplies and exempt supplies. Let's have a look at an example. ABC Limited produces £180,000 worth of taxable supplies and £60,000 worth of exempt supplies. What percentage of input tax could the business claim back on expenses relating to both taxable and exempt supplies? Well, firstly, work out the total amount of supplies the business produces. This would be £180,000 plus £60,000 to give you total supplies of £240,000. The next step would be to calculate the percentage of this that relates to taxable supplies and exempt supplies. To do this for taxable supplies, this would be £180,000 divided by 240,000 times 100, giving us 75%. And for exempt supplies, it would be 60,000 divided by 240,000 times 100, giving us 25%. As 75% of supplies relate to taxable supplies, this means that the business can reclaim 75% of the input tax relating to expenditure covering both taxable and exempt supplies. The only other section to look at is what's known as the de minimis rule. This isn't something you'll be required to calculate during the exam, but it is something that AAT have stated that you'll need to be aware of. The de minimis rule is there for when the exempt supplies of a business are relatively small. Then, rather than having to split out the taxable and exempt supplies, HMRC allow the business to reclaim all the input VAT. The rules for this are as follows. The total exempt input tax is below £625 a month, and the exempt input tax is less than 50% of the total input tax. Let's have a look at an example. And just to note, the scenario figures relate to a full year. XYZ Limited purchases £48,000 worth of goods excluding VAT related to taxable supplies, and supplies of £15,000 excluding VAT related to exempt supplies. Would the de minimis rule apply? Firstly, calculate the VAT related to goods being used for standard rated supplies. 48,000 times 20% equals 9,600. Then calculate the input tax on the goods used in the production of exempt supplies. 15,000 times 20% equals 3,000. Firstly then, is the exempt input tax less than 50% of the total input tax? Well, the total input tax would be 9,600 plus 3,000, equaling 12,600. So is 3,000 less than 50% of the total input tax? Yes, it is. Next check, is the exempt input tax below £625 a month? Well, 3,000 divided by 12 equals £250 a month. As both criteria have been met, the business will be allowed to claim the VAT back on both the goods relating to standard rated and exempt supplies. And that wraps up this video on partial exemption. I hope you found it useful, and if you have, remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more AAT content. Thanks again for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.